You know, another good example of this sort of like anyone can find themselves on the wrong end of the Communist Party's wrath. Chloe Zhao, the Chinese director who just won an Oscar for her film Nomadland for directing it. What, first Asian winner, second woman?
First Asian winner, second woman, first woman of color. Like a lot of these, you know, like it was historic win. And then
as the Global Times had referred to her back in March, the pride of China.
Yeah, that's right. Like at the Oscars, she gave a speech about classical Chinese poetry.
Well, I mean, it wasn't about that, but she did talk about it.
She talked about it. It's the kind of soft power thing that the Communist Party really loves. As you said, Matt, back in March, they were talking about how great Chloe Zhao is, and like, you know, she has a big following in China because there's that sense of pride. Like, oh, this is a Chinese national who has risen to the top of the Western society. That's a great story. Except some Chinese netizens found an interview she gave back in 2013 where she was asked why did she get into directing, and she mentioned how growing up in China was like a place where not everybody lies. There are lies everywhere.
Yeah.
And now she's been, what's the term? De-peopled?
De-personed.
De-personed.
Well, she's been canceled. But like, I think, you know, when you talk about cancel culture in the West and we talk about it in China, like it's the same, ultimately the same principle. But in China, what's happened is the entire state apparatus gets behind canceling someone. So like, it's an even scarier thing.
Well, and so this is the challenge a lot of Chinese netizens are having, because they're like, wait, I thought we were supposed to feel proud about this woman.
Yeah. Like,
wait, we're not allowed to talk about her now?
It's interesting because she's also, you know, she comes from kind of a privileged background. Her dad was like a big executive at some big companies. Her stepmom is like an actress in China. So, you know, she's not like, it's not like she was making really controversial. She's not a dissident, really.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Her parents sent her to boarding school in the UK and in LA for high school. So like she comes from this kind of privileged background, and yet like if they decide that like, you know, you're now persona non grata for something that you said, that
for one thing you said years ago, almost a decade ago,
and then like and I think also there's this kind of like domino effect essentially where, you know, if it's kind of not clear whether it's not okay or not, like the default is it's not okay. So then, you know, it's all censored. And I think like there's been some kind of a little bit of pulling back from the state-run media side since she won the Oscar, because there started to be all of these media reports in the West about how China censored the Oscars because of Chloe Zhao. And so suddenly this is like a bad PR move from them. So now the Global Times has kind of pivoted to like being like, well, you know, her film's not anything real special, but, you know, yeah, it's still nice that like, you know, that she's won, but it really, her win just shows how much racism and sexism there is in the U.S. because it took 93 years for like an Asian woman to win Best Director.
It's the poisoning the well thing we were talking about earlier, how like, you know, they will attack you for something else to try and distract from the main point.
So they basically attacked the entire like Western movie culture for not having enough Asians, which is not the point of what happened.
Well, I think also it's that there seems to be some kind of, I think even like 5 or 10 years ago, there would have been more kind of pride at Chloe Zhao succeeding in the West, right? But now the Chinese Communist Party is trying to build up its own culture to be just as good as, or maybe better. So it doesn't matter
if you win the Oscars. What really matters if you win
the
Chinese version.
The Chinese equivalent of the Oscars. Like the point is to like make the Chinese institutions, Chinese like awards, the Chinese Olympics or whatever, right? Like make that like even more prestigious than the Western versions.
And the great thing about the great thing that happened with Chloe Zhao is, and this kind of ties back to Tesla, she is directing The Eternals, the next big Marvel movie. And, you know, I'm sure in Disney's calculation, they were thinking, oh boy, we get this famous Chinese director. It's going to do great in China. And Marvel has done great in China, lots of big money. But now it's all kind of up in the air because who knows how the Communist Party is going to treat a foreign movie directed by a non-person, a depersoned
Yeah,
Chloe
I
Zhao.
mean, she could be rehabilitated.
She could be rehabilitated.
Right. But the fundamental problem is that Hollywood wants to do business in China.
A country that uses gang rape as a form of torture.
Yeah, I mean,
I didn't know that.
Uh-huh.
well, I think that.
Where's the source?
Well, I think that. I mean, that's not, asking you for a source isn't like unreasonable,
Yeah.
but
But there are the sources though.
Yeah, just Google China gang rape.
people really seem to have a hard time with doing that. But I think it's also the way that Disney thinks about pandering to the Chinese audience, which is not. Okay, but like
We're getting to the end of the podcast. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Well, my point was going to be that like just to be.
Your point before I said something really stupid.
I wasn't going to put it that way.
I'm really good today at putting things into the right. I'm framing things right.
Okay. Well, my point was going to be that Disney thinks that, having a Chinese director would boost the film, but that's not really necessarily like how it works in China, because there's lots of films in China that are all made by Chinese directors. You know what I mean? Like it doesn't quite work the same way as it does somewhere where like in America where there aren't a lot of Chinese American directors.
Now, the way to pander to the Chinese Communist Party is to have a line in your movie, like in the Transformers movie, I think it's Transformers 4, where they had a line like, let's call the central government for
It was
help.
in Hong Kong.
Yeah. And they wanted to call the central government for help. You're like, just like that kind of thing. And obviously we've talked before about movies that go even further than that. But yeah, that level of pandering Hollywood is willing to do. But also, like the irony of this is that Hollywood is like what's happening to Hollywood in China is basically what happened to Tesla, what's happened to all these Western companies. And the path for Hollywood is, ooh, look at this great China market. They start to make some money. Some of it's artificial because of the way they inflate theater numbers, but a lot of it's, real money. And then, but they have to hire locals and do joint ventures and stuff. And when they film in China and now you've got Chinese homegrown film studios that have learned all these techniques. They're making Chinese homegrown movies that are of really good quality.
Well, I mean, I don't know that they're
But
good quality, but the point is that the state is behind the Chinese homegrown movie industry.
And eventually Hollywood is just going to get partly or fully kicked out of China so that market can be dominated by Chinese movies. And those Chinese movies are going to show in, American theaters
that are owned by Chinese billionaires.
Right. I mean, AMC was purchased by a Chinese company. I'm not sure if it's still owned by
Dalian Wanda
has
had some issues.
They've had some issues. I mean, also theaters have had issues in the last year, but
not in China. I just saw something about how it's the largest movie audience in the world now.
Right. Well,
hey, we should get into there.
Into the China market.
That's basically kind of what the article was saying.
All the Western companies, without exception, that go into China have either been screwed, will be screwed, or are currently in the process of being screwed because China, say it with me, is a country that uses gang rape as torture.
That needs to be the framework for any discussion about China and the Chinese Communist Party.